Good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Today our guest is Verlyn Rosenberger, and Verlyn is, as she describes herself, and I think others would readily agree, an environmental activist. And as part of our discussion, she indicated that this is something that has its roots early in her life and has really been something that she's worked on pervasively kind of throughout her life. So I'm going to ask her, Verlyn, if you would start first with, you said you grew up on a farm, and you credit your mom and dad both with developing an early interest in a lot of things having to do with nature and a healthy respect for the environment. How did they do that, and what kinds of things did they instill in your thinking and appreciating of the environment?
Well, I think first about Mother and how she was just so appreciative of the beauty of the sky. And lots of times she'd say, "Oh, come to the window and see this rainbow." Or when we'd be out hanging clothes up on the line, she'd say, "Oh, look at those beautiful clouds." And we could see the sunsets in the evening and sunrises in the morning, and just an appreciation of the beauty of the sky, I think, was something that my mother instilled in me. And then with Dad, lots of times I'd hike out with him to bring up the cows for milking in the evening, and so I'd ask him about different plants that were growing. What's the name of this weed and what's the name of that weed? And he was the gardener in the family, and I worked with gardening as well. And then he was big on conservation. Don't use any more water than you need, only so much toothpaste, and that kind of thing. And then too, I remember, I don't know why, but there was a recycling place in Decatur for newspapers. And every so often, we would load up the car, the trunk, and the back seat between my brother and me, and underneath our feet, and haul newspapers to Decatur where they were recycled. And so that was part of that conservation issue too.
So you graduated and you left and went to Eastern.
Right.
And you took some science classes there to prepare you for elementary teaching, which
Correct.
was your goal. Were there any learning experiences there that particularly impressed you as you thought about, your affiliation to the environment?
Well, it was always interesting to look through the microscope and see all the little critters that were on those slides. But I think one of the things I remember the most is a tree leaf collection that we were asked to do for one of the classes. And the professor asked us to collect 75 different tree leaves, put them in a notebook, and write information about them. And being a bit of an overachiever, I gave him 100. And I still use that notebook for my own personal interests for decades, until finally those leaves got so dry and crumbly I had to throw them out.
So you graduated and got a teaching job in Decatur, and you and a friend who were rooming together did several Audubon summer camps together.
We
right?
did.
And after attending those camps, you prepared slide programs, which you shared with various groups here in Decatur. What do you feel like you learned by doing those?
Well, number one, I think I learned to solidify teachings that I had been exposed to at these camps, and then hope to help develop an appreciation for nature and the outdoor world with the people who watch those slide programs.
Yeah. You went to a camp in Maine, and the instructor gave you a charge that changed your life. What was the charge, and how did you respond to it?
Well, it was the end of this 2-week mainly nature ecology camp, and the instructors took us out to sit on these big boulders by the water and gave us our parting messages. And it was, pretty nostalgic, and I just remember the one instructor said, "Now go home and do something. Not to just leave what you've learned here, but actually do something." So, when Betty and I got back home, and we lived in an apartment over on Elder Lane, we found out that the city of Decatur was having a trial glass collection. So we asked everybody in our apartment building to put all their clean, empty glass containers in a box in the basement, and we hauled them off to the recycling trial. And we wanted to do that with newspapers too, but the building owner said, "No, that's too much of a fire hazard, so you can't do newspapers."
Yeah. So that was really kind of the start of your doing something, and you've been doing things ever since.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. You've been recognized in many ways for your environmental dedication and projects. If you had to pick out two that were probably the ones you could say you're the most proud of, what would they be?
Well, I guess because I helped instigate a Project Ravine, save a very important natural area behind Southeast School, in which our faculty and parents and students and other people that were interested helped to clean up the ravine, get all the trash out of there. The school board paid attention to it, and the newspaper paid attention to it. And eventually the school principal wrote up a recommendation for me to be named Macon County Conservation Teacher of the Year through the Soil and Water Conservation District. And so that was the first big award.
Yeah.
And then they in turn nominated me for the Illinois State Conservation Teacher of the Year, which I received in, I think, 1972 maybe. I might say too, and all through this doing, both Betty and I did a lot of work in our classrooms with the children, teaching environmental education, and I was fortunate to have trees outside my classroom window so we could put up bird feeders and have a tree friend and make pictures of it during the seasons. And
over the years you were working on environmental projects, were there any that had results far beyond what you'd hoped for?
well, I think that leads to when Paul and I joined the CIOP, Central Illinois Organizing Project, which later became Illinois People's Action. And John Beard from Central Christian Church invited us to hear Don Carlson speak about this organization and what it was about and what it meant. And we were very impressed, and then went to First Press and Peacemaking Committee, and they agreed that our church should become members of CIOP. Well, it wasn't, we worked on a lot of things not having to do with the environment, which were important things, but along about in 2006, I think, I can find my notes, we began working on fracking. I know at that time, fracking was just taking over the whole country and causing a lot of damage in many places. So IPA said we really need to work on this, and so I know at that time I spoke to the Macon County Board and I spoke to the City Council. George Virgil and I went on TV one time and spoke together about fracking, and eventually we met with some key people in Springfield and made strong recommendations about the kinds of law we should have and the kind of penalties there should be for fracking.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, that did become a law and it passed, and there hasn't been too much fracking around Illinois because these frackers don't want to deal with
Yeah.
these strong regulations and the
Yeah.
penalties. And and then from there were a number of different things, but the latest now is the climate change clean power plan. And again, it's the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act that was a result of a previous Future Energy and Jobs Act that we worked on with the powers that be back in 2017, and then just in 2022 the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was signed into law, and it includes a work hub for Decatur. And so we were really, really working hard to make sure we got that because we need jobs here. But all during this involvement with environmental justice work with IPA, I wrote letters to legislators and the governor. I had face-to-face meetings with our Representative Sue Shear, lobbied at the Illinois State Capitol. I mentioned I spoke to various groups. I spoke at hearings of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the Illinois Commerce Commission, organized letter writing campaigns through church and encouraged people to go to the Civic Center and where a hearing was held, and picketed and protested and just raised Cain.
Right.
So being a spokesperson for IPA and our Decatur chapter has really been a large part of what I've done.
Of all the projects that you've worked on, been involved with, what do you feel has given you the most personal gratification?
Oh boy. Every single one of them. Because every one has resulted in some outcome that I hope has been helpful, that has been encouraging and motivating to other people. And two, I always think of Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice?
Yeah.
And this is environmental justice. Do justice.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.